Welcome to All Sides with Ann Fisher. When he was elected to Cincinnati City Council in 2011, Democrat P.G. Sittenfeld was 27 years old, the youngest in Cincinnati history to be elected to that job. Now he's vying to face off against incumbent Republican U.S. Senator Rob Portman. But first, he has to get past former Ohio Governor Ted Strickland in the March 15 primary election. Coming up, we'll hear from a third candidate, social justice activist Kelly Prather. Joining us now is P.G. Sittenfeld. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, Ann, it's great to be back on the show, especially to get to do it in studio. And I mentioned this off air. You perhaps might not have known what a prominent role your show would play in the Democratic primary for the United States Senate this cycle.
Right. I've heard it over and over and over again in the ads about Ted Strickland's changing.
Yeah, for your viewers that don't remember, he came on your show, and again, this isn't my words.
Last March or something like that.
These are Ted's words as a declared candidate for the United States Senate in this very race, boasted about having an A+ rating from the NRA, bragged about being the guy that voted against the assault weapons ban, and then said, that was my record, and it is my record. So, you know, those are words that I'm sure he wish he hadn't said.
Ted Strickland has made it clear that he will not debate you before the March 15th primary. He said that he doesn't want to give you a platform that he thinks you haven't earned through your own effort and work. Those are his words. Moving from a first-term slot on Cincinnati City Council to the U.S. Senate would be a jump. So do you think you are seasoned enough to manage a U.S. Senate seat?
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, you know, there's no shortage of folks that serve in the United States Senate today that had no public service experience, or, you know, historically there are folks that went from a similar perch to the United States Senate. So it certainly wouldn't be unprecedented anyway. But more than that, I actually think there's such a hunger and such an appetite across the electorate and right here in Ohio right now for fresh perspectives and people bringing new ideas and new leaders stepping up. And I would be the first to confess that if people want more of the same, you know, between Rob Portman and Ted Strickland, they've spent nearly 40 years in Washington. If there's a hunger for, like, let's do something a little bit differently, and I do think in this strange season in our politics, there is a yearning for something fresh and different and new, then I think my candidacy much better fits the moment. The other thing I would argue, and I feel really strongly about this, and look, Columbus is a great example of a city that's had incredible progress because of the leadership here, and it's obviously the leadership, you know, the public sector leaders, the private sector, civic sector, etc. But I think that cities and local communities, these sort of right now in our democracy, these are the laboratories and the engines where things are actually getting done. So in the city of Cincinnati, where I'm proud to be the highest vote getter, I'm proud of the story that we have to tell when it comes to reforming our police-community relations, when it comes to attracting good paying jobs, when it comes to stabilizing the foreclosure crisis. And I think there's a real different narrative and story to tell between cities that are working versus the dysfunction, the gridlock, the obstruction in Washington. And I think it needs more people like me who have been, you know, practitioners on the ground getting things done.
You're listening to All Sides with Ann Fisher on 89.7 NPR News. My guest is P.G. Sittenfeld. He's a Democratic candidate in the U.S. Senate primary on March 15th in Ohio. A Quinnipiac poll shows Rob Portman beating you by more than 20 percentage points in a head-to-head race. The race is essentially tied between Portman and Ted Strickland. All along, the Ohio Democratic Party has opposed your candidacy, saying that you can't beat Portman and Strickland can. That's so. What about that? What about your?
Yeah, look.
You know, what about? Is it relevant to you that the seat could be lost if you were elected?
I think a lot. Well, look. Obviously, I wouldn't be running for this seat if I didn't believe I absolutely can win. But not only that I can win, that I'm the right person to win. If you want to beat someone as entrenched as Rob Portman, who's such a creature of Washington, who's been in that role, sort of in Washington and in the Senate seat for a long time, I don't think you can do it with a sort of, you know, conventional approach. And I think that they've already shown this. Rob Portman and the Republicans are so eager to make a race against Ted Strickland, a rerun of the race from 6 years ago. And to be crystal clear, I don't think that the narrative that they want.
You mean his race against
Kasich? You know, but look, I think Ted Strickland has been wrong on guns. We have different agreements on climate change. He made a comment about a willingness and openness to confirming anti-abortion Supreme Court nominee. So he and I have our differences. One thing I have never articulated as a difference between us, I've never blamed job losses on him, because there are other people you can point to, you know, Wall Street, the policies of George W. Bush. But I think Republicans know the exact playbook that they want to use against him. And I think that if I'm our nominee, We are instead of the opportunity to make this race about the future, to make it about new leadership. And if that's the frame that Rob Portman is competing in, he's going to look like the guy that spent too long in Washington, has cast too many out-of-touch votes, has been too closely aligned with the Bush administration. So to your question about polls, look, so much of what these polls have captured is name ID. And at the end of the day, I have high name ID. That's not a very inspiring campaign slogan. What wins at the end of the day is having a message. No one can say that we haven't run the most substantive campaign in the race. We've taken bold, progressive stands on the issues, and I think there's a reason why 3 newspapers in the state of Ohio have endorsed so far: the Cleveland Plain Dealer, the Akron Beacon Journal, and just today, the Elyria Chronicle Telegram. All 3 have endorsed our candidacy and cited the substance that we've been putting forward. So I think I'm Democrats' best bet in November.
When you talk about the hunger for something fresh and new, are you talking about an age difference?
No, look, a lot of other people have talked about age, and I've been very clear, and this is the campaign that we've run. We think that it should be about ideas and it should be about issues. But look, do I believe that getting some new personnel in some of these seats in Congress would be good? People that haven't had organizations like the NRA sinking their talons into elected officials for a long time. Yeah, I think that sort of fresh perspective and new approach would be a very good thing. Look, Ted Strickland has taken tens of thousands of dollars from the NRA over the course of his career. So I think it makes it harder for him to push back against them. That's not going to be an issue for me.
You have made his stand on gun control an issue. How does let's contrast clearly his pro-gun ownership stand,
sure,
his ratings with the NRA, which he doesn't have anymore, by the way, because of statements he's made. Contrast them with yours on the topic.
Yeah, so let's go down, where we both are on the issues. And I think the appropriate thing to do is say, what's a person's record? Now, obviously, I haven't served in Congress,
right,
so I haven't voted on things like background checks. So
you have no record.
A lot of my record here is the public statements that I've made and the opinions that I've always held. So for his entire career, both in Congress and as governor, Ted Strickland voted against every single gun safety reform measure that was ever put in front of him. So he voted against the Brady bill. He's voted against every kind of background checks. He voted against the assault weapons ban. He voted against a requirement for child safety locks on handguns. As governor, he pledged to sign a bill allowing firearms into establishments serving alcohol. So on every issue, which I would say, let's try and make progress. Let's try and have some common sense reform so that kids and families aren't dying, so that we're not in the position that we're in, and where more than 30,000 people are being killed by guns every single year. Look, and folks can always learn more on my website, pgsittenfeld.com. All of our positions are out there, but I absolutely support comprehensive criminal background checks. I do support, like Ronald Reagan did, reinstating a ban on assault weapons, and innovative things like micro-stamping ammunition. So if you contrast his record with the policies we put forward in this campaign, it's a very stark contrast.
You also disagree on the level of minimum wage increase that there should be. You want $15, a federal minimum wage of $15. Ted Strickland favors $12 an hour. What goes into that calculation for you?
It's a pretty straightforward. Well, there are 2 calculations, but let me start with the more important one. If you go to work every day and you're putting in an honest, hard day's work, you should not be left living in poverty. I mean, we are the greatest country on earth. We're the most prosperous country the world has ever known. There is, to me, I believe, a fundamental promise that if you do that, you're not going to be left living in poverty. And, while obviously right now I think the minimum wage is way too low, even getting to $12 an hour, you're still going to be left in a situation where you're hanging on by a very thin thread. So I think going to 12 immediately and then in short order phasing up to 15, that's calculation number 1. Calculation number 2, as you know, we have an economy that's close to 70% driven by consumer spending, right? So, if you put money back in the pockets of middle-income folks and low-income folks and give them the opportunity to go and buy the proverbial car, washer, TV, anything else, not only is it good for people in their individual lives, but that money cycles back to the economy and makes for a more robust American economy as a whole. So 2 reasons for a $15 minimum wage.
Last week in your first joint meeting during a Cleveland.com and Plain Dealer endorsement interview, you clashed with Ted Strickland over his gun rights stand. I want to talk not about the issue itself, but about how you related to each other. Your other opponent, Kelly Prather, lost her patience with the bickering. Let's listen.
Boys, please, please. Really, this is the problem that we are experiencing in Congress today. We have men acting like boys. We don't get anything done. That's why you need a woman to come into office and, you know what, say, you know what, let's compromise. This is ridiculous. You both are acting like children.
Now, you know, I'm going to talk with Kelly Prather coming up later on in the program, but I want to talk about this tone that seems to be increasingly prevalent. I won't say it is prevalent, but it seems to be increasing in our discourse. This bickering, this arguing, we've seen it on the Republican debates time and time and time again. Now, I suspect we will going forward as well. What about the tone of politics these days? Well,
so a few things. One, since you played a very specific snippet, I would encourage everybody to go to cleveland.com, watch the entirety of that conversation. And if you listen to the conversation that happened,
we didn't have time to do that.
But you just played. No, to what Ted Strickland and I were doing, which I lament that Ted Strickland wasn't willing to engage in any debates across this entire campaign and wanted to sort of short circuit the voters and not stand side by side with his opponents in that way. We were having a substantive, issue-based, robust conversation about the issues. And isn't that what our democracy is all about? I think that's what helps people
distinguish. But it never feels like it when you're listening to people. You can't hear what anyone's saying.
So to the second part of your question, I only bring it up because you played that segment. I don't think anybody would say it looked like, you know, the Wild West or professional wrestling.
But I couldn't understand what you were saying to each other. It was a jumble of words.
I would encourage your listeners to go and listen. In terms of the tone overall, look, I think that the Ted Cruzification of the United States Senate, if I can invent that word, has been a bad thing, where he thinks that to shut down, you know, a lot of the federal government is somehow an accomplishment or a badge of honor. And look, as the highest vote getter in one of the 3 big cities in the state, where we help oversee a $1.5 billion budget, I'm proud that I've worked on, passed initiatives with, passed legislation with Democrats, with Republicans, with independents. I fundamentally don't believe that compromise is a dirty word. I think working together, including with people who have differences of opinions, that's how things get done. That's what our democratic process is all about. And look, while I obviously, you know, will never waver or bend when it comes to, you know, core beliefs of mine. I'll never waver or bend when it comes to a woman's right to choose. I'll never waver or bend when it comes to marriage equality. I'll never waver or bend when it comes to, you know, rejecting the notion that money equals speech. But on things where there should be common ground, you know, reforming our tax code, making reforms to our criminal justice system, dealing with addiction issues, Democrats and Republicans could say, let's sort of, you know, let's put aside the things where we're not going to agree and focus on the things where we can actually solve some problems. That's what I've done as an elected leader in Cincinnati. It's the same spirit that I'll take to Washington.
Max in Columbus, you're on the air with PG Sittenfeld. He's a Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate. Hi, Max.
Hi, and I just wanted to ask your guest, I'm a very pro-gun person myself, and every person that I'm around or speak with is very pro-gun. Mm-hmm. To my understanding, Ohio is very pro-gun, and I personally would like to keep it that way. I've noticed that through politics and different time periods that people have put in gun laws and gun restrictions, and they've always either failed or they have made the public very upset and angry, and the guns come back. And I was just wondering what your guest feels that gun laws will do and why he feels that gun laws will actually work.
Yeah, so Max, first of all, thank you for your question, and thank you. I'm going to presume that thank you for being a responsible gun owner. You know, and my belief and my strong sort of support of the Second Amendment, I don't think is in any way incompatible with saying the things that I've talked about. Not only are they supported by a majority of Americans, by a majority of Democrats, they're supported by a majority of gun owners. So, you know, Max, I was actually just at an event 2 days ago, was talking with somebody who I think said he owns about 40 guns. I think he said his family owns about 100 guns. You know, they've taken steps, gone through certain requirements to make sure they're acquiring their guns responsibly, using their guns responsibly, which to me, you know, all the more reason why we would want to say to other folks, before you get a weapon, you're going to get a background check. So in case you have a history of mental illness or a history of domestic abuse,
well, I guess the question is, what does that background check pick up? Mental illness often is not picked up in background checks.
Look, in the tragedy that unfolded at Virginia, Virginia Tech, if we had one of the things that I've proposed, Dan, is let's say if someone has been involuntarily committed, they are not able to legally just walk into a store and buy a gun, right? That would have been the Virginia Tech shooter. Other people always want to say, well, you know, these loopholes, would they actually work? Absolutely. The so-called Charleston loophole, where if your background check doesn't go through in 3 days, the sale can go forward. Imagine if you were a bank officer, and would you give the money out if the credit check took more than 3 days? If you were a doctor, would you give out the diagnosis if the blood work hadn't come back in more than 3 days? But Dylan Roof, who brutally and horrifically murdered folks in Mother Emanuel Church down in Charleston, he got his gun because of that loophole. So look, millions of people have already been denied accessing firearms because of background checks. We need to close the loopholes. Max, I don't know how you feel about President Reagan, but I agree with him that assault weapons, these were designed for military combat situations. As their name suggests, we don't need them in the streets of our cities, which is why, and we've also moved forward with an initiative to restore home rule around firearms reform to local communities, so that if Columbus wants to reinstate the assault weapons ban that they once had, they're in a position to do that. If Toledo wants to say no firearms in our city public parks, they can reinstate that, rather than the opposite direction the state legislature is going, of saying yes to guns in daycares, yes to guns in bars, guns everywhere. I don't think that's actually in line with what responsible gun owners are looking for.
Max, thanks a lot for your call.
And then can I just say, because we
Sure.
are talking a lot about guns today, look, it's a place where I think Ted Strickland has a really unfortunate record. I obviously disagree with his A+, but you know, we started this campaign with a proposal on reducing the crushing burden of student loan debt. We've put forward proposals for making sure we're protecting and cleansing Lake Erie for future generations. So, you know, we've touched on a lot of issues in our campaign, and again, would encourage folks, go to our website, pgsittenfeld.com, learn more. I just don't want anyone to think that this is my sole reason for running it. It's one area of disagreement.
We'll have a link to his website, and we'll also put a link to that Cleveland.com plain dealer interview with P.G. Sittenfeld and Ted Strickland and Kelly Prather as well on our website at wosu.org/all-sides. So you can listen to it for yourself, absolutely. And John in Marysville, we're just about out of time, but I wanted to get your call.
Just quick to say to PJ, I'm an anti-establishment Democrat. I'm voting for Bernie Sanders, and I'm voting for you.
Well, I'm very grateful. Thank you for your call. Thanks for participating in the process. And look, whether folks are anti-establishment, establishment, I think there is an appetite, you know, across the board for people who, again, they want to send some fresh faces and some new voices who aren't going to be afraid to advocate for a progressive agenda. That's what they're going to get with me, and I'd be honored to earn everyone's vote in the March 15th primary.
All right. Thanks for that call. And where do you stand on the presidential candidates in the Democratic Party? Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton?
I have not made an endorsement. There are things I like a lot about both of them. It might not surprise you to hear that, you know, there are a lot of things where when it comes to gun safety, I'm more in alignment with Hillary. When it comes to some of Bernie's positions, you know, around Wall Street accountability, around tackling climate change, I'm more in alignment with him. What I will say, and I would be very proud to run on a ticket with either of them and make sure that whether we're running against Donald Trump or Ted Cruz or whoever, let's go out there and make sure that, you know, Democrats are keeping control of our government and advocating for an agenda that I think can touch people's lives in a meaningful way.
P.G. Sittenfeld, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate your time.
I hope we can do it again in the general election. Thanks so much, Ann.
P.G. Sittenfeld, he's a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. Coming up, we're going to hear from Kelly Prather. She's also a candidate for the Democratic nomination for the United States Senate in Ohio. This is All Sides with Ann Fisher on 89.7 NPR News.